Okay. All right, here we go. So last time, this is where we ended, right? We did our hello world, we hit run, and we see hello world. By the way, tell me, is this font size okay for like the Java? Let me know if it could be bigger or if you're pretty happy with it. Just type in the chat. Let's see what people say. Yeah, a bit bigger? Okay, well, why not? I don't want to make it too big because I want to be able to have more than one line of code. Let's make it 26. Okay, hopefully that's good. If it's still difficult, let me know and we can up it more. Perfect. Okay, cool. It's big, but it's a bit blurry. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's the stream. Fortunately, the recordings will be in 1080, but I don't know. I guess the stream's got some funny compression going on. So it's blurry, but you can still read it reasonably well. Is that right? It's a bit blurry. Screen res looks like, oh, that sucks. Yeah. I wonder if there's settings on my end. I'll look into that a little later. So the problem with this is you look at the Python's print and you say, oh yeah, okay, it's print hello world and it prints hello world. But you look at the Java and you see public class, some class, this weird fancy squiggly bracket, public static void, main, string, args, system.out, print line, hello world. There's a lot going on just to say hello world. Look, Python, print, hello world. Java, what the heck? That's annoying, right? I'm getting 144p. Ooh. So there's a lot of extra stuff going on here. But really, this is the line that matters for the printing. All of this other stuff is some boilerplate code that we just need for setting up our Java stuff. So first things first is, okay, mind the fact that, so in Python, we could use double or single quotes for a string. In Java, you need to use double quotes for a string. If you use single quotes, it can only be a single letter long because it'll have a character type, not a string type. So just be aware of that. This really won't be an issue that you need to think about. Just use double quotes and you'll be good. But we see public class and whatnot. Well, you might remember public from 161. We never actually had to use the keyword public, but it was an idea that we were aware of. And so public is a visibility modifier. Things can be public, things can be private, and there's a couple of other options, but those are the main two we'll think about for now. Public is code in other pieces of my project can see this code. Private is all the code within this chunk of my project can see that code, but every other piece of code in my project can't. This is what we were doing in Python. If you remember, like when we put the underscore, it was like a way of saying, okay, it's private. That doesn't mean you can't access that stuff. You still could, but by convention, when we see that underscore, that means, yeah, it's private. This is a value that belongs to this class, belongs to an instance of this class, and we don't want other people to have access to it directly. And that's when we had like our getters and setters, right? So that's what public is. We are making a public class. And we want it to be public because we want the class that we're writing to be accessible by everybody. Now the other keyword, class. Well, you should remember this from Python too. Remember class? Well, that was whenever you wanted to like start defining an object, right? When you wrote a class, you would say class : right? Well, in Java, we say, okay, public class, and then the name of the class. Just like Python. We would say class, name of my class, and then we would have a colon. Here, we don't have a colon, we have an open squiggly bracket. Unlike Java, or unlike Python, where everything in Python had to be like indented properly or it wouldn't work, in Java, like everything here is indented properly, but the indents aren't what matter for determining what's inside what. It's these squiggly brackets. So this bracket and this bracket align, so they are the class. So when I hit run, it's going to run all this, and it works. I can unindent all of this stuff. right? No indents, and it still works. I can do ridiculous indenting. Run, still works. I could literally put this all on the same line of code, on the same line. Oh, what did I do wrong? I think there. And still works. That said, just because you don't have to, you have to do proper indenting. The proper indenting is about style here. It's not a necessity, but it's a necessity. Okay? So the indenting doesn't really matter, but the squiggly brackets are what define the open close. Public, okay, class, it's the same as Python. The interesting thing, everything in Java is part of a class. It has to be. Static is probably the most complicated one of the keywords that we'll talk about today that will become far clearer later in the course. But static is a keyword that means that what we're about to define belongs to the class itself and not an instance of the class. So we don't need to make an instance of that class to use that method. A good example is Java math class, but we'll talk about this far more later, but here's an example, right? So if I had some class called some class, I could say some class dot whatever my static function is. Where here, if I'm making an instance, I would say an instance of the thing that's of type some class is a new some class, and then I call the method on that instance. I'm willing to bet 85% of you are like, wait, what? Not important right now. It's just one of the keywords we need here. All right, I didn't know I would have, if you want anyone to see it, you indent it. What's the difference? What's the difference between what? Sorry, I missed that. Oh, difference about what I was just saying? This. Yeah, okay. This. If it's unclear, it should be about as clear as mud right now. Void. Everything we write in Python, like all the values that we were used to have types, right? You have a variable that holds the number 11, right? And well, that's an integer. Well, in Java, unlike Python, in Java, you have to specify the type for the variable. But you'll also remember, and we'll talk about this more a lot in the next topic, but every method we write can return something, right? Sometimes you wrote like a function that might take two numbers and return the result of their sum. Something very simple, right? Well, that function returns a value. But what's the type of that value? Well, in Java, we must specify the type of the value that can be returned from our function. Here, we use the special keyword void because we're writing a function called main. And we use the word void because that means it's not returning anything. So because any function can return something, we have to specify the return type. But if it just so happens that the function you're writing isn't going to return anything, you use the keyword void. That's all. What if you try and return something in it? Well, we'll try that in a little bit. In fact, how about you go try that and tell us what happens? Main. Okay, main is the magic function. Remember in Python, the first line of code in your script, you hit run, that's the first line that ran, right? In Java, it doesn't work like that. In Java, the first line of code in your main function is what gets run. So in Python, line 2 gets run because it starts at line 1, it's a comment. Line 2, oh, print, okay, great. Java's gonna go, okay, oh, comment 2, oh, you're defining a class, great. Probably, oh, here's the main method. This is the first line of code I'm gonna run. So the main method is the method that when you hit run on your program calls this. I can't get IntelliJ to work still, so I can't. Well, get that working. Okay, so main is the function we write whenever, the method we write that's where all the stuff's going to take place. And you'll notice that this method takes an argument. So the argument or parameter, it's called args for argument. Parameters, arguments, same idea, right? But we have to specify the type. And the type of this parameter, of this ultimately a variable, is an array of strings. This is a topic we'll talk about more a little later. But the idea here is, just like any function in your program that can take parameters, your whole program can take parameters. So if you want to give your program parameters, it gets read in as a string array. So like an array of strings. Think of array as a list. So like a list of strings that can be interpreted, just like the parameters for any other function. So this is just a way to give your whole program parameters, which is pretty neat. And that's something we'll probably do in assignment 2 or 3. JetBrains. I have 17. Yeah, at least 11. What? Okay, yeah. I did, thanks. Yeah, IntelliJ. Yeah, I don't know. Keep working at it. I'm sure you get it figured out. And I think that's basically it for all the fancy keywords. String args. Yeah, so defines a variable called args. That is an array indicated by that of strings. Remember, all values need a type. This is how we give our program command line arguments, basically parameters for a whole program. More on this later. And then the open and close squigglies. In Java, we don't use indentation to define scope. We use the open squigglies, close squigglies. Any questions about any of that? Nope. Well, all right. Okay, so at this point, you are not expected to be like, oh, okay, I can go program in Java. Yeah, you can't get the professional edition, which is the one I have, but whatever. So here we go. Great. This is our Hello World program. Fantastic. The next topic for next time, get your computer set up for 162. Yeah, okay, great. I've noticed a lot of people think that they were doing it right, but they didn't actually follow the steps in lab 1, and that's why it wasn't working right. Just make sure you're following the steps and you're not trying to get ahead of yourself, because if you skip some steps, something might go wrong. Okay, all right. Topic 2, Java versus Python. This is really the main thing. This is like the only topic where I'm really going to sink teeth into, like Java, Python, okay? So we already saw our Hello World. Python, Hello World, Java, Hello World. Great. What's important here is this and line 4 here. Now, in Python, we could have variables, right? An int, 5. A float, 5.5. A string, 5. Right? This should be, you should be happy with this. Even if you are coming without a Python background, you better know what variables are. And there, we've created we've got 3 variables here in Python. But in Java, we have to we have to specify the type for the variable beforehand. I can have an int. I'm creating a variable called an int, and I want it to be 5. But because an int is an integer, I have to say, okay, I'm making an integer variable called an int, and it's set to 5. I'm making a double, we just use the word double instead of float. A double called a float, and it's 5.5. And a string called a string, and it's this. So we have to specify the type. What does double mean? Okay, so a floating point, so this will depend on precision. Long story short, the number of bits that your computer will use to store a decimal number, a float, is specified, but it's limited. So you don't have that much precision, because you might remember from last semester we were talking about how, like, well, how many infinities, like how many numbers are between 0 and 1, right? It's like, well, there's a lot, because there's 0.01, 0.001, 0.0001, and so on, right? So it's not even about going like 1 to 1.1 or 0 to 0.1, you know? So there's a lot there. So float is, I don't know, what is Java Java float bits. How many bits does it use? A float uses single precision 32 bits. Great. But when you say double, your computer is automatically going to set aside 64 bits for that float, meaning that the precision you can have with your floating point numbers is better than just if you wrote float. You could write float here and it would work, but just always use double. Just do that. Just say double. From now on, Control F float and replace it with double. Why is string still in line 3 if we are making different types? Well, this is for like arguments for this function. So your main function is still only taking the array, the string array. But then within this main function, we're saying create an integer, create a float, create a string array. Maybe this will come together once we kind of see how it's used together. For now, ignore this. This isn't going to be very helpful for you for a couple of weeks, at least. Okay, so notice the 5 main differences. We must declare the variables with their types. We will use the word double to be floating point numbers. Technically, we could still use float, but it almost always see double. A float takes up 4 bytes, 8, 16, 20, yeah, 32, 8. Okay, great. 8 bytes is 64 bits. Just multiply it by 8. And we use double quotes for strings. We use // for commenting instead of a single hash. And an interesting thing here is in Java, we must end our statements with a semicolon. See how system.out.println ended with a semicolon? Well, here we also need those semicolons. But not every single line of code will need a semicolon. Like notice how line 2, there's no semicolon there. And line 3, there's no semicolon there. Things like your ifs, your loops, your functions, your class, you don't have the semicolons there, but all your other statements will have semicolons. I don't like that. Well, get used to it. You get used to it, yeah. If it has a, yeah, that's right. If it has an open squiggly, chances are you don't need the semicolon. If it has an open squiggly and you put a semicolon, you'll have a bad time. This is something that will become so second nature to you that it's like at this point you're like, oh, I have to do act. It'll become so second nature that the semicolon button on your keyboard will get worn out without you even thinking about it. So the main key differences here, int, so we specify the type, double quotes for strings, // double instead of float, and semicolons. So, okay, now as a heads up, from now I won't be including the class stuff in the public static void main unless necessary. So these 2 lines of code and all the following examples are removed to just keep the code clean and simple. But assume it's there in order to work. Yeah. Okay. Warning. Unlike how in Python you can change the type that the variable is. Perfect. In Java, you can't do that. If you say the variable other int is an integer and you set it to 5 or set it to whatever, and then you try to assign it something that's not of type integer, watch. So let's say int and int and there I created an integer and didn't assign it any value yet equals hello world. Look, it's like no, it required, you probably can't see because it's really small font, but required type int, you provided it with a string. IntelliJ is telling me you messed up. So it won't like that. Okay, declaring and assigning variables. There's a difference between declaring and assigning. In Python, you didn't need to explicitly declare because they got created automatically as soon as you assigned it a value. What I mean here is you write another int equals 11. Python goes, okay, I'm going to make a variable called another int and give it the value 11. Great. In Java, we can explicitly declare, and like on this example here, we declared it and assigned it all on one line. We're saying the integer variable called other int equals 5. And then tried to do something with it. Here, I'm doing it on multiple different lines of code. I'm declaring it, I'm now assigning it, and then I'm printing it out. If you're thinking, well, what's better? Should I do declare and then assign or do it both on one line? Do whatever you want. I'm almost always going to do it on one line of code. Error when I try. Okay. Error when I try to return something in void. Unexpected return value. There you go. And it sounds like maybe you had you got it working, so that's good. So let me just be very, very precise about what I mean. Int ASD equals 5. If I run this code, what? Oh, print ln. Okay, we see 5. If I do this, same thing. It syntactically different, but what it means is exactly the same. There's no difference there. I almost always will do it this way though. You can declare it if you know you're going to need it for like some other chunk of your code below, but whatever. Reusing variables. Okay, declaring and assigning. Python, yeah, you could reuse variables. A is 5, A plus 2, B equals A plus 7, B equals B plus 1. So like we're there, look. We set B and then we assigned B a new value, but we still use the variable B. Yeah, you can do the same thing in Java. It's just the difference here is you only need to declare it once. So int B equals A plus 7. But then later when I want to reuse B, it's just B. I don't need to say int B because B already knows it's B. Because this is it's getting declared and assigned. But once it's declared, it doesn't need to be declared ever again. Can you declare multiple variables at once separated by commas? Give it a go. Tell me what happens. So yeah, the answer is yes. You can have multiple variables declared on one line. A lot of people really encourage people not to do that though. Just, to each their own. But, just because you can doesn't mean you should type thing. So yeah, reusing variables, it's a thing. Warning, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Ha, I just said that. Yeah. Can you redeclare a variable and switch its type? Give it a go. These are all great questions. Let's see. Let's see what happens. Int ASD. String ASD equals hello. Uh-oh. Variable ASD is already defined in this scope. Shucks. Look at that. Anyways, that's it for the lecture today. If you want to rewatch it, yeah, it'll be on YouTube. I'm going to post it immediately after this class, after I stop. In fact, here, I can start that process.